card holder here. Okay, so now the video card is secure, and basically at this point the system is complete. All I have left to do now is to put the side covers on, the front and back side cover, and hook up the power. Then basically I would run the BIOS setup, set up the RAID array through the Intel BIOS, and then begin loading my operating system. So this PC is pretty much ready to go. In this segment, we're going to install the processor into the motherboard, the heatsink onto the processor, and then we're also going to install the RAM. Now, installing the processor and heatsink is probably the most difficult single part of building a PC for the novice person. But it doesn't really need to be that difficult. You'll see exactly how it's done here, and I'll give you some tips and tricks along the way to make it easy and a little less intimidating. Now, the one problem with this is that in most situations, when you go to install the processor and RAM, the motherboard already has to be mounted in the system. You can't really install the processor and the heatsink with the motherboard out of the system because you have to put a lot of pressure, and particularly when you install the heatsink, and it's normally the best if the motherboard is already installed. Well, that's where in the other segments I've talked about having a chassis that uses a removable motherboard tray, because that means you can install the processor and heatsink and memory with the motherboard essentially out of the system without the confines of the case around you, making it difficult to see what you're doing and get your hands in there and everything like that. Well, I save trays, motherboard trays, from cases that I've discarded just for the purpose of installing processors, heatsinks, and RAM to make it easy. Then once all of this is installed, I can then load the motherboard into the chassis with everything ready to go. So at this point, if you don't have a removable motherboard tray, you'll have to install the motherboard first into the chassis, then complete these steps that we're going to do here. So now we're going to install the processor. This motherboard happens to have a socket LGA1366. That stands for Land Grid Array 1366 pins. Now what that means is that the pins are actually in the socket, not on the processor. If I take, for example, the processor looks like this. It comes with a protective cover over the back of it, and if I take that cover off, it just snaps off. You can actually see the lands on the back of the chip. Now these are just basically gold spots, gold contacts. There's no more pins. Older processors, or other processors in some cases, use individual pins there instead of the lands. In this design, the pins are actually in the socket. Now, in order to get this ready to be installed, I have to remove the tension on the load plate. And what we have here is called the load lever, which presses down on the plate that will eventually hold the processor in the system. So I'm going to move this lever over to the side, lift up what's called the load lever, and then I'm going to lift up the load plate. And now I'm going to remove the plastic protector that comes in the motherboard. This protector protects all the tiny little pins which are in the socket. There's, as I said before, 1,366 fine, very tiny pins in the socket, and you do not want to touch them. Just the slightest touch, snag it with a little bit of cloth, something like that, will bend those pins and basically render the motherboard destroyed. And when you go to turn it in for a warranty repair, they will look at that. And if they see that the pins were bent, you may have a problem collecting on that warranty. So now, with the load plate lifted up, we are ready to actually drop the processor in.